Good morning. That's loud. Can I hear that? Yeah, you mentioned my interview this week with Jimmy. I told him that this is going to launch him into stardom. Forget all that fiddling for Garth Brooks. I didn't do anything for him, but this is what's going to, and I say that with all humility. Thank you for being here this morning. There was a lion that was pretty proud of himself, and he wanted to prove his mastery over the animal kingdom one more time, and he was so confident that he went past all the smaller animals in the jungle and went straight to the tiger. And he said, "Mr. Tiger, who is king of the jungle?" And the tiger said, "Why, you are, Mr. Lion." And he sticks out his chest and gives a mighty roar of approval. And he moves on to the bear. He said, "Mr. Bear, who is the king of the jungle?" And the bear says, "Why, of course you are. Everyone knows that." And the lion lets out a mighty roar of approval and moves on to the elephant. And he asks the elephant, "Mr. Elephant, who is king of the jungle?" And the elephant wraps his trunk around the lion's body, twirls him in the air a few times, beats him on the ground 5 or 6 times, throws him in a nearby lake, and the lion crawls out, and beaten and battered and bruised, he looks through bloody eyes and he says, "Look, Mr. Elephant, just because you don't know the answer doesn't mean you have to be rude about it." Do you know anyone that lives with that same sort of self-delusion? You know, if you don't, you can turn on the television and you can find numerous people who are bereft of humility. Yes, there is that actor or actress that gets up and accepts an award and thanks all those who helped him or her reach that level. There's the professional athlete after the football game or basketball game or whatever sporting event it is that thanks God for the ability to play the game. But for every ounce of humility, there's a pound of arrogance. And it's not just the TV personality who thinks they're better than everyone else, or the actor or actress or professional athlete or whoever it is that thinks that they are so full of themselves that they can strut sitting down, right? No, it's found in the little things among us, like those who are habitually late and always make everyone else wait on them. The person who's constantly looking at their watch or their phone as if they're distracted instead of listening to what you have to say. The person who's constantly posting things on social media for the sole purpose of getting likes and tweets about themselves. Far too many have the wrong idea when it comes to humility and being humble. So maybe we should start there. What humility is not, perhaps. Humility is not self-pity. You know, someone says, "My life is so horrible." They're not being lowly or humble. It's not humble to say, I'm horrible, my life is horrible, everything around me is terrible. That's not an indication of humility. We hear that sometimes. Somebody says, "Oh, stop being humble." That's not humility. That might be depression, and that's serious, and that's something that needs to be addressed, but it's not humility. Some of the most prideful and arrogant people on the planet are those who pity themselves, because it's all about pointing the spotlight at you. No matter if it's, look how great I am or look how pitiful I am, it's a preoccupation with self. So self-pity is not humility. Neither is self-degradation. Some people don't know how to take a compliment. You can say to them, "Great job, you're awesome," and they say, "Oh, I'm nothing special, I'm not that great," and the response is, "Oh, you're just being humble." Well, that's really not humility either. It might even be closer to sin, really, when you think about it, because who made you and who gave you that ability, right? God did. Did God mess up? The better way to approach that might be just saying thank you. But it's not being humble by being self-degrading. Humility isn't pretending that you can't do anything right. We all do something well, and it's okay to take pride in that, and it's okay to accept a compliment. But the reason why humility is not self-pity or self-degradation is because, again, it's all about self. And anytime you're preoccupied with self, then you're on the pride side of things and not the humility side. I could say to, "Mark, you're a great song leader," and you could respond by saying, "Well, I'm not that great, don't say that." that's not being humble, right? I mean, the better response would be, thank you, Chris. Let's talk about you now. Yeah, let's take the spotlight off of me and let's talk about somebody else. Humility is simple. It's not being preoccupied with self, good or bad. Like Paul said, humility is when you consider others as more important than yourself. Let's look at an example of humility. It's found in Numbers chapter 12. Let's start in verse 1. Then Miriam and Aaron spoke against Moses because of the Cushite woman whom he had married, for he had married a Cushite woman. I always find that funny that they had to put that in parentheses there. And they said, has the Lord indeed spoken only through Moses? Has he not spoken through us as well? And the Lord heard it. Now the man Moses was very humble, more than any man who was on the face of the earth. Do you see the problem right from the beginning? You see what Miriam is doing? She is asking the question, what makes Moses so special? I mean, why is he so important? I mean, doesn't God speak to all of us? Aren't we special? We were made in the image of God as well. It all started with this Cushite woman, apparently. I guess she didn't meet the standard of Miriam and Aaron, perhaps. The malignant talk moves from gossiping about Moses' wife to speaking out against the Lord's servant. Hasn't the Lord spoken to us as well, she said? And we see this type of behavior all the time in our culture, don't we? Perhaps you've been privy to it, you've heard it, maybe you've even said it a time or two. A fellow employee gets Employee of the Month. Well, that's political. She just got that because she's pretty. I mean, she's late more than she's on time, and when she is here, she doesn't do anything. Or what about your child sitting the bench while someone else plays before them? Well, why do they get to play while my son or daughter sits the bench? I mean, that's political. I mean, the coach just doesn't like me, doesn't like our kid. We see it all the time. It happens all the time in the culture around us, and that's exactly what's happening here in Numbers chapter 12. Miriam, Moses' own sister, mind you, is upset that her younger brother is getting more than his fair share of the spotlight, and she does what so many people do today. She starts griping and complaining and trying to gather a posse, because that's what you do when you're upset and you want to malign someone else. You try to gather a posse to agree with you, and she finds that with Aaron. You know what Aaron should have done? He should have said, look, you don't need to be talking about God's servant like that. We need to cut this off right here. But he doesn't. He goes along. And he's done this before. Remember in Exodus chapter 32, when the crowd wanted a tangible God and Moses was away, they didn't know if he was going to come back, and they wanted a God that they could touch and they could feel. And so he takes all of their gold and he throws it in the fire, and out pops this golden calf. Don't you hate when that happens? I mean, that's how he acted like. You know, I threw the gold in there and out pops this golden calf. I don't know how that happened. But he went along with the crowd, and he does it here too. He should have cut Miriam off, but he doesn't. And notice the last 5 words of verse 2. And the Lord heard it. Uh-oh. That ain't good. As a preacher, maybe shouldn't tell you this, I get this sixth sense of satisfaction when I see, like Elisha the prophet, and those kids are saying, hey, Baldy, and God causes a bear to come out and maul them. I think, yeah, that's right. You don't make fun of bald preachers. You know, there's this sixth sense of satisfaction I get sometimes. Maybe it's the vengeful person in me that I shouldn't be talking about in the open. But you better not taunt God's man. In Numbers chapter 12, God strikes Miriam with leprosy to show her and Aaron that you don't mess with God's prophets. And more importantly, you don't mess with the way that God has set things up. Now, the man Moses was very humble, more than any man who was on the face of the earth. What do you think of when you hear the name Moses? Play a little word association here. What pops into your mind when you hear the name Moses? Maybe Exodus, maybe brave, courageous, strong, leader. I mean, those are the things that I think about when I hear the name Moses. But apparently, being strong and brave and patient and all those kind of things were not what made Moses great. No, apparently what made him great was that he was humble, more humble than anyone else on the face of the earth. And you've heard me say this before, and I'll continue to say it, but when you read the Bible, don't read it so much for information as you do application. Don't read it just to appreciate, read it to translate it into action. Do you want to be Moses? That's the question. Do you want to be Moses? Do you want to be the humblest person on the face of the earth? Because when you read things like this, you should be reading it with application and saying, you know what? I want to be like Moses. And you look at other characters in the Bible and you may say the same thing. Not in every way, because all of them have their flaws. You filter out the flaws, you take out the bad, and you keep the good. Do you want to be like them? Because I believe that God has put these characters in here and their story for us to learn from and to either steer clear of what they did wrong or to internalize what they did well and try to apply it to our own lives. Do you want to be the humblest person on the face of the earth? Do you want what Moses had? Do you want to be like these strong characters of the Bible? Do you seek to please God in the way that they did? Let's read further in Numbers chapter 12. Verse 4, "Suddenly the Lord said to Moses and Aaron and to Miriam, 'You three come out to the tent of meeting.' So the three of them came out. Then the Lord came down in a pillar of cloud and stood at the doorway of the tent, and he called Aaron and Miriam. When they had both come forward, he said, 'Hear now my words. If there is a prophet among you, I, the Lord, shall make myself known to him in a vision. I shall speak with him in a dream. Not so with my servant Moses. He is faithful in all my household. With him I speak mouth to mouth, even openly, and not in dark sayings. And he beholds the form of the Lord. Why then were you not afraid to speak against my servant, against Moses?' So the anger of the Lord burned against them, and he departed." So here's what's going on. God hears Miriam running her mouth about Moses, and God steps in, and it's a bad day for Miriam and Aaron. God comes down to set these two straight, especially Miriam, and God basically says, I speak to prophets, I make myself known to them, I appear to them in visions and dreams, but with Moses it's different. With Moses, I speak in a way that's different than I speak to anyone else. I have conversations with him. Think about what God is saying here and what we just read. God is saying that my interaction with Moses is almost like a human-to-human interaction. It's different than the way that I speak to others. And you better be okay with that. And I don't care if you are or you're not, but you got to be, because this is the way that it is. I speak to Moses differently. I've chosen to do that, and you've got to be okay with it. God chose to communicate with Moses in a way that was very different than the way he spoke to everyone else, including Miriam, and she had the gall to speak out against God's faithful servant. Moses was the humblest man on all the earth, and you're going to speak ill of him? Continue reading, verse 10. "But when the cloud had withdrawn from over the tent, behold, Miriam was leprous, as white as snow. As Aaron turned toward Miriam, behold, she was leprous. Then Aaron said to Moses, 'O my Lord, I beg you, do not account this sin to us, in which we have acted foolishly and in which we have sinned. Oh, do not let her be like one dead, whose flesh is half eaten away when he comes from his mother's womb.' Moses cried out to the Lord, saying, 'O God, heal her, I pray.' But the Lord said to Moses, 'If her father had but spit in her face, would she not bear her shame for 7 days? Let her be shut up for 7 days outside the camp, and afterward she may be received again.' So Miriam was shut up outside the camp for 7 days, and the people did not move on until Miriam was received again." You want to know what true humility looks like? Right here it is. You see it with Moses. You see a prime example of why he was called the humblest man on the face of the earth. Because instead of looking at Miriam in her leprous condition, this grotesque and debilitating disease, instead of seeing her like that and saying, "Well, that's what you get. Shouldn't have spoken ill about me. That's your comeuppance." No, instead he prays for her. He prays for his sister. He prays that God would relieve her of this condition. He doesn't want it to be held against her. I mean, forget all the things that he said about me, that she said about me, God. Please heal her. I can get over that. I just don't want to see her hurting. I just don't want to see her in this state. And you would certainly expect Moses to respond that way, since he was the humblest man on the face of the earth. But what about us? How would we respond if we were in a similar situation? Let's shift gears for just a moment. Let's look at another example. I want you to think about David and Saul. Saul was jealous of David, so jealous of David that he sought to kill him. David's popularity was on the rise. Saul was trending downward as David was trending upward. And Saul believed that David was a threat to the throne. David was famous. He was up and coming, and Saul didn't like it one bit. And so he hunted David. David was his prey. And what did David do? Well, he ran, he fled, he did his best to stay out of Saul's crosshairs. Saul learns from his spies that David is hiding out in a cave in the Judean desert, and so he takes 3,000 of his men with him to dispose of David. 3,000 men. You'd think about a handful would do it, but he takes 3,000 men with him to kill David. And I want you to notice 1 Samuel chapter 24, starting in verse 3. He came to the sheepfolds on the way where there was a cave. And Saul went in to relieve himself. Now David and his men were sitting in the inner recesses of the cave. The men of David said to him, "Behold, this is the day of which the Lord said to you, Behold, I'm about to give your enemy into your hand, and you shall do to him as it seems good to you." Then David arose and cut off the edge of Saul's robe secretly. It came about afterward that David's conscience bothered him because he had cut off the edge of Saul's robe. So this is it. Saul is vulnerable. This is David's golden opportunity to rid his life of the threat to his life. And David is told, you better take advantage of it. It's now or never. But despite his men urging him to kill King Saul, David refuses. And notice what he says. "Far be it from me, because of the Lord, that I should do this thing to my Lord, the Lord's anointed, to stretch out my hand against him, since he is the Lord's anointed." You see, Saul was still king, and that meant something to David. If God wanted Saul removed from the throne, then he would do it. But it wasn't David. He didn't believe it was his position to do that. If God wanted him gone, he would remove him. But otherwise, David's only response was to submit, because this was the Lord's anointed. Keep reading. Verse 8. "Now afterward David arose and went out of the cave and called after Saul, saying, My Lord the king. And when Saul looked behind him, David bowed with his face to the ground and prostrated himself. David said to Saul, Why do you listen to the words of men, saying, Behold, David seeks to harm you? Behold, this day your eyes have seen the Lord, and have given you today into my hand in the cave. And some said to kill you, but my eye had pity on you. And I said, I will not stretch out my hand against my Lord, for he is the Lord's anointed. Now my father, see the edge of your robe in my hand, for in that I cut off the edge of your robe and did not kill you, know and perceive that there is no evil or rebellion in my hands. And I have not sinned against you, though you are lying in wait for my life and to take it. May the Lord judge between you and me, and may the Lord avenge me on you, but my hand shall not be against you." Now some might say, well, if David had killed Saul, then 3,000 men would have been waiting outside the cave to kill him. And so it was really just a good business decision for him not to kill Saul, that it wasn't humility, it was just strategic. But I don't believe that. Because of those 3,000 men, there were many in that company that I'm sure recognized that David had a right to the throne. Many of them were under his command when he was over the army of Saul. And so I don't believe that this was in any way a business decision. I think it was absolutely a sign of humility. Because in David's mind and heart, he believed that the Lord had put Saul in the position that he was in. I mean, he calls him the Lord's anointed. If the Lord wanted him removed, then he would have removed him. And David's only responsibility was to submit and understand his position. And that's what humility is all about. It's about understanding our role, our responsibility, and understanding where we fit in all of this. So my question to you this morning is, which one are you? Of all the people that we have talked about this morning, which one are you? Are you Miriam? Hopefully not. But I think if we're being honest, we've all probably been a Miriam at one time or another. In that we have spoken out in jealousy against someone else because we believe that they were getting more than their fair share of the spotlight. We wanted the spotlight turned more towards us, and yet it was turned towards them, and we didn't like it, and maybe we gossiped about them. Maybe we rallied the troops and tried to get a posse together to side with us so that we could feel better about ourselves. Maybe we were slandering the other person. Or are you an Aaron? Have you been an Aaron in that you just listened? Maybe you joined the posse. Maybe you just didn't cut it off. You didn't agree with the person, but you didn't speak out and say anything when you should have. You should have stepped in and said, hey, we don't need to be doing this. Gossip is a sin. We don't need to be slandering. We need to leave this alone. Maybe you've been an Aaron. Maybe you've gone along with the crowd instead of standing up. Or are you a Saul? Hopefully you've never sought to kill someone who you felt like was getting more of the spotlight than they deserve, but you can certainly murder them in your heart, can't you? You can verbally butcher them either to their face or behind their back because you feel that you should be in the position that they are in, and so therefore you don't take kindly to their upward trend. Or are you a Moses? Are you a David? I know you know this, but the Bible is not just words on a page. The Bible is not just meant to be consumed for academic purposes. It's not meant just for us to acquire the information and let it reside in our brains and do nothing with it. Stuff like this is written for a reason, so that we internalize it, so that we look at it and we say, I want to be like that. Not what a great story or what great men. I mean, aren't they such great people, that old David and Moses? I mean, Moses was a murderer and, David committed adultery and, murder. But, I mean, other than that, they were great guys, and I want to be like them in their best moments. That's what we should be saying to ourselves. In their best moments, when they pleased God, when they were men of faith or women of faith, I want to be like them. I want to be like them in every way when it comes to pleasing God. I want to be the humblest person on the face of the earth. I want to please God the way Moses did. We don't just read to appreciate. We read and apply. We pursue humility. We desire it with all our hearts, and we make that our goal because humility is essential in the transformation process that we talked about last week. We talked about being a transformed church, and it starts individually with us being transformed people, and you cannot be transformed until you are humble. Humility is about less of me expressed through more of Jesus. It's about more of Jesus expressed through less of me. And it starts with the Beatitudes. You've seen that? When Jesus speaks, blessed are those, he starts with, blessed are the poor in spirit, the humble. And the reason he starts there is because there will be no one in heaven who is not first poor in spirit, who is not first humble. Because it starts with humility. It starts by recognizing that it's not about me. It's not about me. It's all about him. It's about what he can do through me. That's where the transformation process starts. You cannot be transformed until you humbly submit to the process of transformation, until you move you out of the equation and let it be about God and Jesus and about the mission. I want to close this morning with a question. Who wrote the first 5 books of the Bible? Yeah, Moses did, right? We often call those the Pentateuch. Who wrote the first 5 books of the Bible? Moses did. So who wrote Numbers? Moses. You see where I'm going with this? So Moses wrote these words. Now Moses was a humble man, the most humble man on the face of the earth. That would kind of be like me standing up here and saying, I'm just the most humble person you'll ever meet. And you would think, no, you're not. The very fact that you had to say that proves that you are not humble. It's kind of like the church that got together and decided that they were going to give a medal and a certificate to the most humblest person in the church, and they had to take the medal away the next week when he wore it to church. It's kind of the same thing. Moses wrote the words that Moses was the humblest person on the face of the earth. Think about that for a minute. That doesn't seem very humble. But who told Moses to write those words? Not Moses. God did, right? And if God tells you you are humble, then you better believe that you are. I'm sure Moses was uncomfortable writing those words. But if the Holy Spirit tells you to write something down, you write it down. Even if it's about you, even if it's something that may be uncomfortable for you. But you see, the whole point is that Moses didn't have to deny who he was. He didn't have to deny that he was a humble person. I mean, God made him. He tried that before, didn't he? Remember when he's visited by God in a burning bush and God calls him to lead his people out of Egypt? He tried the excuses. He tried the self-degradation. He tried to say, who am I? I'm not anybody that can lead people. I mean, look at me. I don't even speak well. And God says, who made your mouth? Because at that moment, Moses was kind of spitting in the face of the one who created him. So if God says you're humble, you're humble. And it's okay to recognize what God recognizes. Humility isn't about denying your talents and your abilities. It's not about having a low estimation of yourself. That would be a slap in the face of the one who created you. Humility is thinking more about God than you do yourself. That's what it's all about. The gist of humility is thinking less about Chris and more about God and Jesus and others. Instead of being so preoccupied with me, I am preoccupied with God and being more like His Son. In other words, humility is letting God have the spotlight. And it is defined beautifully for us by Jesus in John chapter 5 and verse 30 when He says, I can do nothing on my own initiative. As I hear, I judge, and my judgment is just because I do not seek my own will, but the will of Him who sent me. That's it. That's the essence of humility. I can do nothing on my own initiative. It's the recognition that I am nothing by myself, but I am everything. I am a superpower when I'm attached to God. Because me plus God equals victory. Me plus God equals a superpower because really I'm taking me out of the equation and it's addition by subtraction. It's no longer about me. And it's all about Him. Everything I am is because of who He is. And so my life is just one continuous mission. And that mission is to live for God. He is my top priority, and I am preoccupied with Him. Where are you at this morning? Who are you? If you're a Miriam, even if you're an Aaron, and certainly if you're a Saul, get your heart right. Recalibrate it. Get it aligned with God and His will and His mission. Let Him take up residence in your heart and take full control of all this real estate within you. If you're a Moses, if you're a David, congratulations. But my guess is that everyone sitting in the auditorium this morning it's kind of all these people at some time or another. We've all been a Miriam. We've all been an Aaron. We've all perhaps been a Saul in some ways. And in our best moments, we've been a Moses and we've been a David. I don't know where you're at this morning. But if we are going to be successful as a church family, it's going to start with all of us being humble and getting it right within these walls so that we can get it right outside these walls. So, if you're not on the same page with God when it comes to humility, we've got a song and you are welcome to come as we stand and as we sing.